All right, in about another half minute, then we'll go ahead and get started. Jonathan, I have unmuted you just so that you are aware. And again, just to reiterate to the folks that are on the call, you are automatically muted when you join the call. You can unmute yourself at any time to ask questions. And then, of course, at the end of Jonathan's presentation, there will be a question and answer period. The couple ways to unmute yourself is either one, click the icon should be your lower left-hand screen as you're looking at it, the unmute button or the microphone button. The other thing is if you are at a PC, you can press and hold the space bar that will temporarily unmute you for as long as the space bar is pressed. When you release the space bar, you will go back to mute. And again, this is being recorded and we will share this video on our YouTube channel. And I think we'll go ahead and get started. So welcome everybody. Thanks you for joining the Economic Development Committee. We have guest speakers occasionally. This encompasses several other committees within the chamber. I'd like to introduce Jonathan Curth. He is the Development Review Manager for the City of Fayetteville's Planning Division. In his role, he oversees the first stages of a project submittal, review, and approval, as well as provided liaison services with various city boards, including the Planning Commission and the Board of Adjustment. So without further ado, Jonathan, the meeting's all yours.
Certainly. Thank you for the introduction. I feel like that's a pretty good synopsis of what I do with the city. I've been with Fayetteville for about 4 or 5 years, and I'm excited at the opportunity that I got with being promoted to Development Review Manager about 6 months ago. One of my main tasks was trying to work out ways to streamline our development review process. As many of you likely know, Fayetteville does have for better or worse, a rough reputation in the region for being difficult to develop in. We want to take a look at that with fresh eyes, but without delaying any further, one of the main reasons I was asked to speak to you all today was to update you on a lot of the bond projects that are occurring in Fayetteville right now. With that, I'll share my screen here with you and jump right into that. Hopefully that's visible to all of you. As a little bit of background, and for those who may not recall, in April of last year, the residents of the city of Fayetteville voted or were asked to vote up on a 1% sales tax to support approximately $230 million bond issue, and that was approved in April. Phase 1 of that bond issue was approved by the city council a few months later for the largest amount of that bond. It's intended to be broken into 3 phases, with the first phase including about $130 million worth of improvements and upgrades to the city, and with the remaining phases used for a lesser amount, totaling about $90 million. Perhaps somewhat unusually compared to some bond issues seen in Fayetteville previously or in the area at large, each of the items were broken out. When residents were asked to vote on them, that allowed people to, or allowed elected officials to take the temperature on certain items, and also for residents to pick and choose things they thought were valuable without necessarily voting up or down the entire bond issue, as there are certain elements that some may find valuable and others not so much. As you can see here, the preponderance of the bond centers around transportation. It was about $74 million of the bond issue. It should come as no surprise with the costs of concrete and everything else these days in the United States at large. The other big ticket items on the bond were a new police headquarters, some improvements to our parks, and probably the flashiest item, and which has been on the headlines the most, the cultural arts corridor. I'm going to go a little bit more detail on all of these just because they merit a little bit more conversation given the size of the proposals. But one that I think is of maybe of particular interest to this group is that this is the first bond issue that I'm aware of that a economic development element was approved with it. Granted, it was one of the smaller dollar amounts on there, but it did include about $3 million for the city to be able to use for land acquisition, site development, and infrastructure improvements as a part of a public-private partnership. So that's some new ground being tread by the city in an effort to try and attract more businesses to the area and support the businesses that we have. As far as the bond projects go, they fell, like I said, into several buckets. The first of which I'm going to hit on here are the parks. Although they may not in themselves generate a lot of revenue. They are inextricably linked to a lot of the traffic that we saw pre-COVID to the area. Fayetteville is certainly a big attractor of tourists, and whether it's associated with the university or the growing biking culture. As a part of that, Kessler will be doubling its ball field capacity. Goalie Park is adding some additional parking. Centennial Park, which you can see in the right-hand corner here, is having an extensive trail network added to it prior to its opening. That's the park that's located just north of the Martin Luther King and Lowe's locations, or the Walmart and Lowe's locations on Martin Luther King. It was purchased in collaboration with Centennial Bank and the Walton Family Foundation, and the city was awarded the International Cyclocross Championship for 2022. So hopefully all the current health concerns can clear up before then, and we can get the tens of thousands of competitors and participants anticipated to arrive with that. In addition to that, there are some other smaller items in there that are of significance. One which may seem rather mundane is additional lighting to the downtown square. That's a comment that businesses in particular and residents and shoppers have commented on or complained about or had concerns about over the years. And the Parks Department is looking at upgrading all that lighting now to make it more attractive in the evenings in particular. Moving on to our emergency services, as you noted, some of the larger items on the bond were the police station, which is intended to be moved from its current location just south of City Hall, just beyond the square, to a piece of property the city acquired northeast of Dean and Porter. You'd easily be excused for not being familiar with the property because it's currently just fields that were previously used by the U of A for experimental agricultural facilities. This is just south of the interchange of Porter / Mount Comfort and I-49 and the Subaru dealership there. The intent is to locate on the site the police station, relocate it there. That would give it more of a central location geographically as Fayetteville continues to spread to the north and west. It would also allow for the police department to jump on the interstate as quickly as possible and get around town much more rapidly. There's also an intent to include a community center aspect to it, and an effort to increase our police department's outreach efforts to Fayetteville at large. On the same piece of property, one of the 3 fire stations that were approved with the bond is intended. That'll be more towards the southeast corner, if you can see my cursor. The fire department location will be there. The police department is intended for the northern end of the site. The site details are currently being worked through, and it's intended to be completed by mid-2022. As far as the other fire station locations go, neither has been firmly tied down. There is discussion of putting another one on South School, somewhere between Cato Springs and the airport, I believe. But as far as the site-specific details, that's not been determined. And I think the fire department has an interest in kind of holding out on the last fire department location to consider how the city continues to grow moving forward. As I noted, the biggest piece of the bond, perhaps unsurprisingly, and as it is in most communities, is transportation projects. I snipped this map from our city's website. If you're ever curious and want to get into the details of the dozens and dozens and dozens of projects, if you go to our webpage and there's a link that says, I think it's your tax dollars at work, and you can get into each and every one of these projects. But I'm going to hit on some of the higher points here, given we could probably talk for hours just about the transportation projects here. They are spread fairly throughout the city. A lot of them are focused more at the older core of the city where street infrastructure is not what it is when you go out west or east in Fayetteville. But there are improvements being done as far west as Rupel, to the north on Zion, down towards the school in the south, and Old Wire to the east. The Zion project is probably the oldest one on the list and the one closest to actually entering construction. If you've ever driven on Zion, you know it feels immediately more like you're on a country road than in the largest city in the metropolitan area. The intent with this is there's tended to be multiple intents with this project. One is to open up a lot of the properties along here for development. The way the street infrastructure is right now would put the costs on any property developers to make many of those improvements, and a lot of that could be prohibitive. Now, this will also open up an east-west connection to the city, which those of you who are residents of Fayetteville know that those are lacking in many parts of the city. And then that's intended to tie into Old Missouri Road about halfway through, with improvements occurring to Old Missouri Road individually with other projects or smaller city projects going south down to Joyce. Another one of the flagship items is what's called the Midtown Corridor currently. This is still largely in the conceptual phases, but you can see on the left side here, that pink square, that's the same location I indicated earlier where the new fire station and police stations or police headquarters are intended to be. That would anchor these improvements, which are intended to include street widening.
Jonathan,
Yes, sir.
you cut out for just a little bit.
Oh, I'm sorry. Where did you lose me?
About the last 30 seconds.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, I'll try not to cover anything twice, but so the second major item on here is the Midtown corridor among the transportation projects. It's anchored on the west by the new police headquarters and fire department, and includes upgrades to Dean Street, in particular, for having a shared use bike path. Improvements will also include trails throughout the area going from east to west, which is a pedestrian and bicycle connection that the city doesn't really have much of right now. Some of the larger improvements, but are still highly conceptual, are to 71B, which we may or may not should be calling it that anymore. It's my understanding that in the last week or two, it did formally, finally change hands to the city of Fayetteville. One reason the city sought to pursue this was because it is one of the major thoroughfares, and while it is beneficial for the state to maintain it, the state also has very particular standards about what can and cannot be done in their right of way. And so that has limited the city's ability to put pedestrian crosswalks, to allow curb cuts in certain locations for businesses. And so, as a part of the bond, some money has been set aside, and as a part of the transfer to the city, some money has been given to us from the state to make improvements along College. Right now, again, it's pretty conceptual, but there are plans to potentially include additional signals and also pedestrian crossings. Archibald Yell, if you followed the council meetings lately, is intended to be one of the early focuses of it. It has long been a pretty significant divider to downtown Fayetteville. It's very difficult for pedestrians to get across it. So right now it's being evaluated with public input taken on what ought to be done with the street, whether that includes something like a road diet, reducing the number of lanes, whether it includes putting bicycle lanes on the road, whatever it may be. Our engineering group is doing their due diligence first, making sure we understand the public's concerns with it prior to moving forward to any sort of design. Other bond projects, well, although they may seem kind of minor, are providing some pretty important connections throughout the city. These are three of the ones that stuck out with me. First is Steamboat and Dorothy Jean, which if you're not familiar with that little section of road, it's northwest of 49 and Weddington, back behind the shopping center there where Harps is located. There's been a missing gap in streets there for, well, forever. And the city wants to make that connection so that neighbors can get back out to Weddington and shop there and potentially walk and bike and drive back and forth. One of the more substantial ones here you can see where I'm indicating would include public streets connecting Plainview, which comes east from Washington Regional, down south into Fiesta Square and tie into Rolling Hills, and back down here to Appleby. That would be a pretty remarkable connection the city would have. As it is, there are no east-west connections between Appleby to the south and Millsap to the north. That would also open up a lot of properties along Plainview and perhaps Fiesta Square itself to redevelopment or development. Lastly on these, and this one is also nearing construction, is the Sang to Vantage Bridge. This is a flyover, or more, I don't know if flyover is the correct engineering term, but the intent is to connect the dead end at the east end of Sang, cross over Mud Creek and connect up to Vantage. There's already been proposals for some apartment buildings and businesses back here along the south side of Mud Creek, and also conversations about interest in redeveloping the properties along front. Again, I could go through the transportation projects for some time, but I'll avoid doing that. If you are interested, I do recommend going and checking out the city's website. Just as a quick overview on some of the others, Rupel Road's extension north from its current location is continuing. It is part of what Mayor Jordan has called the Mayor's Box, which is a ring of arterial roads around the city to ultimately serve as like a non-interstate ring road for Fayetteville. The intersection of 15th Street and Razorback, just southeast of Baum Stadium, which some say is the most terrifying four-way stop in Northwest Arkansas, and I would not argue that, is intended for improvements as well. Right now, they're vetting a few options from signalization to a traffic circle to see what the best fit is there, especially with consideration for the game day traffic that can come through that intersection. Other improvements include the intersection of Shiloh Steel and Fulbright. This is the awkward stop sign just southwest of where Target is located. If you're heading south from JBGB or west from Mall and Target, it's the intersection there. And it's similar to Razorback is because of the awkwardness of it, it really has hampered flow to the area and limited the ability of people to get in and out and customers to get to businesses. So that's being vetted for ways to tie onto the Fulbright Expressway and eliminate the need for cross traffic to stop. Similarly, Old Wire and Old Missouri intersections being worked on. If you've been through there, it's very difficult to see. And although they may not seem as high profile, we do have a lot of trails projects going on. We've seen more and more businesses and residential projects recognizing the value that people will put on living near a trail and seeing premiums charged for especially residential housing on trails. So the big projects there include the Mission Boulevard corridor. The goal is to connect, I believe it's Mission Boulevard from, I think it's Maple all the way up to Old Wire to tie into what has been done in Old Wire recently. Also to run along Shiloh to Centennial Park, where the big parks improvements are being done currently to Centennial Park. And lastly, the Salagi connection, which would tie in a lot of the student housing and businesses southwest of Razorback and MLK to all the businesses and housing on the southeast side of Razorback and MLK, and finally close that loop for that trail connection. Moving on to, like I said, probably the most high-profile item on the bond issue is the Cultural Arts Corridor. For those of you that are not familiar with it, spatially it runs from Dixon Street to the north to Prairie Street to the south, and basically hugs the Razorback Greenway on that portion of the city. The first phase of it is intended to be upgrades to the Razorback Greenway itself, to the Tanglewood Branch stream corridor there. There's a piece of parkland that Fay Jones, I can't remember the city or the history if he sold it to the city or gave it to the city, but it's been sitting overgrown for some years. And now it's going to be turned into an art walk that would get you up to West Avenue and the library, which is intended to begin its opening with its new facilities in October of this year. So those ought to complement each other. Additionally, improvements will be made to West Avenue itself, including some better sidewalk facilities and on-street parking. And the bigger, potentially more impactful piece comes in phase 2, which is intended to be done in March 2022, and that's the closure of the West Avenue parking lot to turn it into a public space, bookended by some buildings, and relocation of the parking on West Avenue to a parking deck. That was a specific requirement of the bond issue that every one of those spaces, if closed or eliminated, should be accounted for elsewhere in downtown. And it's been as the topic of several late night council meetings at the end of last year. For those of you who pay attention, the current site chosen and being worked through details and land acquisition is east of Arcegas at the depot, just north of the old Pullman train car that Bank of Fayetteville uses on the northwest corner of Dixon and West. There are a couple options that the architect for the project's working through right now, but either one will be 5 stories and include about 350 spaces. So not only will it replace the 290 lost on West Avenue, but it'll also add more additional parking for the downtown area. These two designs, one includes abutting the parking garage right up to the Arcegas building and having it connect internally. The other one has proposed a pedestrian alley between Arcegas and the parking garage. Both of those are currently being vetted and explored as options. And you can see what the impact of those here. These were renderings shared by Miller Boskus Lack, the architect on the project, during a recent presentation. If it were to be placed against Arcegas, there's the potential for some more of a pedestrian arcade along West Avenue. If it can't be placed against Arcegas, I would push the front of the parking garage face out closer to West Avenue. The goal is still to have some interior programming, not just parking. There's been conversation about having it be a transit hub where buses could pick up and drop people off in the Dixon Street area, but not on Dixon, and hopefully reduce any slow down the traffic there. Also having a police substation and some retail tenant spaces. And again, the goal there is to get this done in the first quarter of February 2022. That said, I mean, that's all I have on the bond items. As far as development services and what we're living right now, it's all been about keeping the wheels of government turning, unfortunately. Like I said earlier, one of my tasks in my position was to try and work out ways to make development in Fayetteville more streamlined and efficient. And we have just simply found ourselves the last 4 or 5 months just trying to figure out ways to make sure projects can continue getting approved, and that we're holding meetings all virtually with the mayoral closure of City Hall. A couple other items internally, we've adopted a new software recently that'll hopefully help us with our project tracking and processing. So we're working through that actually last week and through the next few weeks. So for those of you that do develop with us regularly, you'll probably see some changes, hopefully for the positive, and we're definitely looking for feedback on that. Kind of the mirror side of my position being created was Mayor Jordan's goal to recreate long-range planning in Fayetteville. One of the complaints we often get is that our codes aren't very responsive to changes in development in the city. And it's certainly been an issue. It's simply been an issue that we don't have the capacity to get into our code and start doing major amendments and changes to it when we're just trying to work on getting projects reviewed and out the door in a timely manner. So we've been able to bring on a long-range planning and projects manager who will be working on items like that. They'll be working closely with our planning commission and any ideas they have, as well as our council and members of the community. The last 2 items we've been seeing pieces of the entertainment district. Obviously, that wasn't something that came from development services, but it's came from our vitality director, Devin Howland. And he's done a lot of work with a lot of other individuals to make that happen. Development Services has been trying to work on the back end during COVID to figure out ways to leverage the entertainment district so that businesses could start locating their seating outside and the sidewalks and be able to use otherwise public parking spaces to set up and continue working in the face of all the challenges that everybody's facing right now. And the last item is more specific, but could have some interesting impacts. Is Fayetteville's known for some pretty specific and rigid stormwater and stormwater quality requirements when you develop a piece of property. And we are looking at reviewing those right now and trying to equalize those requirements so that we're not just creating a hard cutoff between certain kinds of developments and other kinds, and trying to make those more balanced in between them so that we're seeing the kinds of development that Fayetteville needs right now and addresses our concerns for affordable housing and urban sprawl. And that said, that's all I have for you all today. I'm happy to take any questions, whether it's about bond issue items, whether it's about development services itself, planning. And if you have those now or feel like giving me a call or email later, my contact information is right there and available. Thank you for having me.
All right, everybody, the time for questions. Do you have any questions, comments, concern that Jonathan can perhaps help you with? Jonathan, I'll give them about another 10 seconds and then we can let you go grab a bite to eat for lunch.
I will just compliment John. He did a great job going around the world in less than 25 minutes. So covered a lot of turf, Jonathan.
Thank you. Hopefully it's helpful to get a picture of what's going on in town today.
Any update on the stormwater utility discussion? It's gotten kind of quiet in the last 3 or 4 months.
Yeah, that's a great question, and it kind of plays into that very last comment I talked about, the equalization of our stormwater requirements. As the engineer that was contracted to look at it, and our engineering division got deeper and deeper into the question, they realized that the deeper and deeper it got them into our code and the more pieces of our ordinances it touched, that they wanted to go back and do more of an audit of everything that it will impact before they understand all the intended and unintended consequences. So that is being brought back before our planning commission for comments, actually this Thursday. And from there, I think they're going to take any comments back and start moving it towards potentially our city council or the ordinance review committee into much more of a public conversation to get more feedback.
Okay, thank you. That's part of our issues up on the western edge of campus down towards MLK is development that's being done kind of parcel by parcel, but it's creating additional stormwater flowing through not only the neighborhood, but into the streets and also under the edge of campus.
Yeah, absolutely. That is one of the biggest areas of concern given the slopes over there. And the way it stands now, there's basically a blanket exemption for single and 2-family buildings. And so that's all people are building. And so we're seeing some very, very large structures that don't have to provide any stormwater consideration. So it's just pushing it off, like you said, on the streets and other people's properties.
Glad to see you taking a broader view. That's what needs to happen, frankly.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mike, for that question. It's a good question. Anybody else have any questions, comments? Again, just to remind everybody, this meeting has been recorded and we will share it on our YouTube channel. Feel free to share this information with other folks, and I really do appreciate everyone's participation and time to listen to Jonathan give us an update. Jonathan, thank you. Your time is appreciated. Very great presentation.
Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. And with that, we'll go ahead and end the meeting.
Thanks, Zane. Have a great day.
Thanks, you too. And everybody else, stay safe. Have a great day.